Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're checking out the latest iteration in Gigabyte's popular M27Q line of monitors, the M27QA. This is a new version for 2024, offering a 27-inch 1440p IPS LCD panel at 180Hz, a minor spec bump over its predecessors, the M27QP and M27Q. In previous years, this series was able to establish itself as a great bang-for-buck 1440p choice, but with increased competition and some dirt cheap products these days, it's going to be harder to stand out. Today's video is brought to you by the Ugreen Uno series, fast and fun charging accessories for the new iPhone. The Ugreen Uno wireless charger 15W is tailor-made for Apple users, with one 15W Qi 2 fast magnetic wireless charger for your iPhone, another wireless charger for your headphones, plus a USB-C charger. There's also the Ugreen Uno Charger 100W, which can charge 4 devices simultaneously, including up to 100 watts through one of the USB-C ports, perfect for charging a MacBook, and with enough power to charge an iPhone 15 Pro from 0 to 60% in just 30 minutes. Both of these Ugreen Uno chargers are compact and pack a groovy robot design with smart status emojis. I love using Ugreen products and think you will too, so to grab a Ugreen Uno charger today, check the link in the description below. The M27QA is very much an iterative product with no major shakeups to the hardware. It's using the same sort of IPS panel as before, a typical modern fast SDR panel, so despite being advertised as Display HDR400 capable, Gigabyte have not added local dimming into the mix this year. It's not the same panel as seen previously, moving to a BOE panel instead of LG or Sharp that we used previously, but it's a similar spec. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but with monitors like the AOC Q27G3XMN offering proper HDR functionality below $300 US, it's an uphill battle to stand out, and that's especially true given the M27QA has an MSRP of $280 US. The design is very similar to previous Gigabyte non-Aorus branded monitors in that it largely strives for simplicity. Most outer surfaces are standard matte black plastic, and the general build quality isn't what I'd describe as premium, but it's not too bad either. It's relatively slim for an LCD, and the design overall seems befitting of a lower cost product. The rear section is a bit gamery, but nothing over the top, and there's no RGB LED lighting found anywhere on this design, though its plain black appearance should fit in well with most desktop setups. The stand is basic, supporting just height and tilt adjustment with a good range of height and decent stability. I also appreciate that the V-shaped stand base isn't as large as I've seen from some previous Gigabyte designs, so you shouldn't have as much of an issue placing items around the base of the monitor. For ports, we're getting one DisplayPort 1.4, two HDMI 2.0 ports, and a USB-C port supporting DP alt mode and 10 watts of power delivery. Unfortunately, while Gigabyte lists the HDMI ports as being 2.1 spec, they don't actually support any of the newer FRL transmission modes, instead using TMDS just like HDMI 2.0, resulting in 18 gigabits per second of bandwidth. This means that a 180Hz refresh rate is only available over DisplayPort, with the effective HDMI 2.0 ports limited to just 144Hz. If these were real HDMI 2.1 ports, they would be capable of 180Hz, but they aren't, and that's misleading. There's also a 2-port USB 3.2 hub and KVM switch functionality. The on-screen display is controlled through a directional toggle on the rear of the monitor, and it supports Gigabyte's usual feature set. This means we're getting plenty of gaming features, including crosshairs, a refresh counter, shadow boosting, various color controls, and the dashboard feature that can show some stats. A pretty good feature set, but no big upgrades compared to its predecessors. We're also getting a standard matte screen coating, which has been used across most LCD monitors for ages now. This helps diffuse light and prevents distracting mirror-like reflections during use in brighter environments. The trade-off is coating grain, which is moderate on this panel. When it comes to response time performance, the M27QA includes the same sort of overdrive settings that we've seen from most previous Gigabyte LCDs. There's 4 main settings as well as a Smart OD mode, so let's start by looking at overdrive off. At 180Hz, performance isn't impressive, but there is no overshoot, which is indicative of native panel performance. The picture quality mode improves things to a response time average of 7.9 milliseconds, and there's still not much overshoot at 180Hz. Cumulative deviation is around 500, but I think we can do a bit better looking at the bounce mode. This is right on the threshold of being too fast, but it does feature better cumulative deviation than the previous setting. Response times improve to around a 5 millisecond average, although overshoot and therefore inverse ghosting has increased. Between the picture quality and bounce modes, you're basically trading off a slight blur trail for a slight inverse ghosting trail. The fastest mode, speed, has significant levels of overshoot and isn't recommended. While the bounce mode is probably the best choice for 180Hz gaming, overshoot quickly becomes problematic at lower refresh rates. At 165Hz, it's still fine, but at 144Hz, there's noticeable inverse ghosting, and it's around this refresh rate where it's better to use the picture quality setting. When assessing picture quality across the variable refresh rate range, it's not as fast as bounce, but produces much less inverse ghosting at anything around or below 144Hz. Even at 60Hz, this setting is still the best choice, but response times fall just shy of acceptable at the highest refresh rates. The Smart OD mode, as usual, isn't much help here, making weird decisions around overshoot settings, including often choosing speed-like settings for moderate refresh rates. This mode usually has too much overshoot. What this means is we're not getting any proper variable overdrive implementation that works well, and ultimately the M27QA doesn't have a single overdrive mode experience. It gets close, with the picture quality mode generally being okay for variable refresh rate gaming, but I'd have appreciated either the inclusion of variable overdrive or more settings that would sit between bounce and picture quality. This is similar to what we saw with the M27QP, which also didn't have a single overdrive mode experience, so no real improvement there. Compared to other 1440p gaming monitors, there's nothing overly special about the M27QA's performance at its maximum refresh rate. It has a similar level of overshoot to the M27QP, with a slight reduction in response time average, while it's faster and has more overshoot than the older M27Q. But really what we're seeing here is not fundamentally different to products like the MSI G274QPF-QD. Some competitors do have somewhat better tuning, such as the LG 27GP83B and especially the Asus XG27ACS, which uses proper variable overdrive, but even then the differences are not substantial. On the other hand, performance I would say is better than some of the lower cost models I've recently reviewed, like the Dell G2724D. On average across the refresh rate range, there isn't much to report either, with the M27QA sitting in the middle of the chart. The good news is this result is superior to the two previous M27Q models, shaving a couple of milliseconds off the response time average with a small increase to overshoot. The bad news is it performs about the same as the cheaper G2724D and is outperformed by the Asus XG27ACS again. It is faster than the AOC Q27G3XMN, and if we look at dark level performance, it also has no dark smearing, which is a win for IPS technology compared to the VA panel used in the HDR-capable AOC model. Cumulative deviation measures the bounce between speed and overshoot, with the M27QA producing a reasonably positive result. On average, performance is about 10% better in this metric than the M27Q and M27QP, moving up to the better cluster of IPS LCDs. However, this result is behind that of the Dell G2724D and isn't all that different to the MSI G274QPF-QD, with anything plus or minus 20% or so being very difficult to distinguish visually. The main differences would be things like single overdrive mode experience or any major outliers. The Asus XG27ACS is the clear leader among standard 1440p gaming monitors with a 16% better result and variable overdrive, but even on average and at some refresh rates, the difference to the M27QA isn't massive. It's very difficult to stand out from the pack in response times when all of these monitors use a variation of basic IPS LCD technology. Fixed 120Hz performance is solid, again improving on the previous M27Q models, but not offering unseen levels of performance. Again, the much cheaper G2724D is offering roughly the same thing. At 60Hz is a very similar story. The M27QA performs well and improves upon older models, but does little that's different to other models offering similar specifications. The M27QA does support backlight strobing through Gigabyte's AIM Stabilizer Sync technology, which works with or without adaptive sync enabled. This setting does reduce sample and hold motion blur, but still ends up with some visual artifacts like a noticeable double image due to strobe crosstalk and red fringing. There are no settings to tweak strobe timing or length, and even brightness is locked, though at a little over 220 nits, it's pretty much bright enough, but this is a nice bonus feature to have. It's not something I would personally use. Input lag is decent on the M27QA, providing a 0.5 millisecond processing delay and a small improvement to the refresh lag component relative to 165 and 170 Hz displays. In general though, this is a very similar result to other monitors, and the level of input lag you should expect won't differ much between many of the options available today. One of the strengths of moving to the latest BOE panels is that they're generally pretty efficient. 200 nit full white power consumption was just 21 watts, a 6 watt reduction over the M27QP, and a smaller gain relative to the M27Q. Again, this isn't different to other products we've recently tested like the Dell G2724D and ASRock PG27QFT2A, but it's good to confirm that power consumption is relatively low as far as gaming monitors are concerned. Like most modern gaming monitors, the Gigabyte M27QA offers a wide color gamut with 96% coverage of DCI-P3 and 75% coverage of Rec 2020. This is a good result that puts it in the middle part of the range of monitors that we've tested, not quite as wide as Quantum Dot enhanced products like the G274QPF-QD, but superior to the original M27Q and the G2724D. It's a similar color gamut to the M27QP. One of the strengths that Gigabyte usually bring with their monitors is strong factory calibration. In its default out-of-the-box configuration, grayscale performance is very good, with little to no obvious color tint and great adherence to sRGB gamma. This leads to a fairly low delta E average. However, we get the usual issues with oversaturation as the display does not use sRGB color space emulation by default, instead expanding regular SDR content up to fill the wide color gamut of the panel. Relative to other monitors, the M27QA certainly puts in a good showing, coming slightly better than the M27QP and much better than the M27Q. I wouldn't say it has a huge advantage in grayscale compared to other options, but it's solid nonetheless. In Color Checker, the results are remarkably similar between the 4 Gigabyte monitors in the chart. The M27QA includes an sRGB mode, and while it does lock you out of some settings such as white balance, the performance it provides is excellent. Grayscale Delta E's are even better than the factory configuration, and the sRGB gamut clamp is very effective at reducing oversaturation and creating a more natural, accurate appearance for SDR content. This is a fantastic result that qualifies for proper factory calibration, even though Gigabyte's website doesn't advertise this. Relative to its competitors, the M27QA offers outstanding sRGB mode grayscale, beating most other options. The Dell and Asus models get pretty close, but it's a step better than previous M27Q generations. Color Checker isn't quite at the same level, however it remains in the top portion of the chart, and this is a fantastic result for those wanting an accurate display from the factory. Performance can be improved through a full calibration with CalMan, but I just don't think that this is all that necessary on the M27QA. If you're using this for SDR content, the sRGB mode is great and highly usable. This IPS panel is quite easy to calibrate if you want to go down that path though, and for wider gamut usage, the results are decent. SDR brightness isn't anything special, but also should be fine for most use cases, with a maximum brightness of 347 nits. It's disappointing to see a regression here compared to previous M27Q models, especially because it can actually do over 400 nits in the HDR mode. Minimum brightness of 64 nits isn't amazing either, so the overall brightness range isn't huge. I was pleasantly surprised by this display's native contrast ratio. 1561:1 is very good from an IPS LCD and puts it among the best IPS gaming displays I've tested. Especially compared to the M27QP, this is a much better result. A 61% improvement is enormous, and many of these standard 1440p monitors have low contrast ratios. However, it's not a unique feature given the ASRock model I recently tested is quite similar, and there are other products like the Dell G2724D offering contrast above 1000:1. It also falls well behind some of the VA monitors I've tested, such as the AOC Q27G3XMN. Viewing angles from this BOE IPS panel are good and shouldn't cause you any issues while gaming, with a large sweet spot for viewing. You also get better viewing angles than you'd see from a competing VA panel, for example. Uniformity though was pretty lackluster, and at least on my unit it was pretty noticeable that the left third was slightly dimmer and grayer than the center section. There was also some fall off along the right edge. This wasn't a deal breaker for gaming, but when I opened an application with a uniform white background like a web browser, it was something I could notice. That said, your mileage may vary when it comes to uniformity. Gigabyte make a couple of mistakes with their advertising of the M27QA. Listing HDMI 2.1 support when it's really HDMI 2.0 level is misleading, as are 1 millisecond response time claims. They also list HDR support with display HDR 400 certification, despite the panel not supporting local dimming at all, leading to a poor HDR experience. Realistically, despite accepting an HDR signal input, this is not an HDR capable monitor and shouldn't be advertised as such. In our feature support matrix, the M27QA does come away with a few wins, including USB-C, a KVM switch, no concerns around flickering, a solid sRGB mode, and even limited backlight strobing support. However, where it doesn't perform so well are in some of the more basic areas, especially anything to do with HDR like brightness or contrast capabilities. Motion performance, again, pretty typical from an IPS LCD. Overall, the Gigabyte M27QA is very much a minor update to Gigabyte's mainstream 1440p gaming monitor series. Relative to previous and popular models like the M27QP and M27Q, the new M27QA is a little better, slightly higher refresh rate, slightly faster response times, slightly better color tuning. But there are no fundamental performance upgrades or new features to make this a more exciting product. It's a very typical 27-inch 1440p mid-refresh rate option. In some ways, being a minor upgrade over an already solid monitor is a good thing. Some of the signature features we've come to expect from Gigabyte monitors are still included here, such as excellent factory calibration in the sRGB mode. In fact, if anything, this is a more accurate display than its predecessors, and this results in a great color experience. There's even a good color gamut and, for an IPS LCD, a great contrast ratio that significantly improves on the M27QP. While motion performance is somewhat better than previous models, it's not doing anything special relative to other 1440p LCDs. Performance is good at 180Hz and acceptable for variable refresh rate gaming, but lacks a single overdrive mode experience, and without variable overdrive, response times just couldn't be taken to the next level. It doesn't have dark smearing like you'd get from a VA, and it's not a slow monitor overall, it's just a fairly standard, typical experience in motion. This isn't something unique to the M27QA. Most 1440p, 180Hz-ish monitors that I'm testing these days offer about the same performance. If you're faced with a decision between the M27QA and previous M27Q variants, the choice is pretty simple at the same price. Just get the newer version. Thankfully, there are no major performance regressions outside of maybe brightness, and that isn't always the case with the new panel, meaning that this is the best M27Q display yet. However, the big issue is the price overall. $280 US is too expensive for what this display is offering in 2024, and I think it gets easily beaten by 3 other products. The Dell G2724D offers much better bang for buck at just $180 to $200 US. It's a 27-inch 1440p 165Hz IPS LCD, and while it's not as good as the M27QA in some areas, in others like motion performance, it's pretty similar. It's hard to go past given it's typically at least $80 cheaper, which in this price range is a massive difference. Gigabyte just can't get away with a similar feature set and performance at a large price premium. If you're interested in a better, more premium 1440p gaming monitor, then the Asus XG27ACS is one to look at. It's $290, so $10 more, but includes better response time tuning thanks to the inclusion of variable overdrive with otherwise similar performance. At this sort of price, the M27QA just had to receive a proper variable overdrive upgrade to be competitive, and that would have been a decent improvement relative to previous M27Q models. Then there's also the AOC Q27G3XMN, which is a 1440p VA LCD offering 336 zone dimming and true HDR functionality for just $280 US. Now this AOC monitor isn't always better than the M27QA, it has much slower response times for example, but that's the trade-off for proper, though entry-level HDR. The M27QA has no real hardware HDR capabilities at all, and these days at around $300, it's almost becoming a requirement. This Gigabyte monitor feels a bit outdated in comparison at this price. Really, this sort of product we're getting with the M27QA is still perfectly fine, it's just more like a $200 or $220 monitor in the current market. At $280, I think it's pretty easy to look elsewhere, but if the price did come down a bit, it could be a worthy consideration. It's not a flawed product, it works well and delivers a good experience, it's just too expensive given the amount of competition in the 1440p space at the moment. So anyway, that's it for this review of the Gigabyte M27QA. If you do appreciate these reviews and all the independent testing that we do here at Monitors Unboxed, then please do consider supporting us via our Patreon account. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you'll get access to some cool benefits like our Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, ICC profiles that we generate during these reviews, and we've also got the YouTube channel membership if you just want an easy way to support us directly here on YouTube. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.